businessman hears noise in the trash can outside his home, but when he sees what's inside, Richard Thompson was finishing another exhausting day when a strange noise from the street caught his attention. It was almost 10 at night, and he had just arrived home after a meeting that ran late, as had become common in recent months. The persistent sound bothered him, a faint whimpering that seemed to come from near the gate of his residence. The 55-year-old businessman had built an empire in the construction industry, but at that moment, standing in his luxurious living room, he felt an emptiness that all his financial success couldn't fill. His wife Nancy had filed for divorce 6 months earlier, tired of living alone in a marriage where her husband prioritized work above all else. Their grown children, Michael, 28, and Jennifer, 25, barely spoke to him, hurt by years of absence during important moments in their lives. Richard approached the living room window, slightly parting the curtains to observe the well-lit street in his upscale neighborhood. The whimpering continued, quieter now, but still audible. His property was in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, where each home was worth millions and security was tight. It was unusual for any disturbance to occur there. Intrigued and slightly annoyed, the gray-haired man with neatly trimmed hair opened his front door and walked down the paved driveway to the gate. The sound grew clearer with each step. It wasn't an injured animal as he'd first thought. It was definitely the cry of a very small child. When he reached the trash can just outside the gate, Richard felt his heart race. The crying was coming from there. From that dark container the sanitation company would empty the next morning. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid and couldn't believe his eyes. There lay a baby, just days old, wrapped in a light blue blanket that no longer provided much warmth. The child whimpered softly, tiny fists clenched in the cold night air. Richard's eyes filled with tears at the sight. How could anyone abandon such a helpless little one like this? Without hesitation, he lifted the baby into his arms, immediately feeling the small, fragile weight against his chest. The child quieted for a moment, as if sensing the human warmth it so desperately needed. Richard rushed inside and immediately called his sister Barbara, a retired nurse who lived a few blocks away. Barbara arrived in less than 15 minutes, still in her robe and slippers, carrying a bag with some basic baby supplies she'd quickly gathered. At 60, she was the only family member who remained close to Richard, even if she disapproved of his workaholic ways. "My God, Richard, how could anyone do something like this?" Barbara examined the baby carefully, checking for any injuries or signs of illness. "He seems fine, but we need to take him to the hospital tonight." Richard watched his sister's every move, feeling an odd emotion swelling in his chest. There was something about this baby that touched him deeply. Maybe it was the fact that he'd missed so many important moments with his own children, or maybe it was the loneliness he'd felt these past months. "Barbara, what if no one comes forward for him?" "Richard, don't start imagining things. This is a matter for the authorities. Let's go to the hospital. They'll handle everything properly." At the hospital, Richard filled out all the necessary forms while Barbara stayed with the baby during the examinations. The doctors confirmed the boy was healthy despite the circumstances. He appeared to be 3 to 5 days old, and there was no identification with him, just the light blue blanket. The hospital's social worker, Dr. Carol Miller, explained the standard procedures. The baby would remain under medical care for a few days while they tried to locate the family. If no one came forward, he would be placed with a temporary foster family until the legal situation was resolved. "Can I visit him?" Richard asked, surprising even himself with the question. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. In fact, it would be helpful if you could come back tomorrow to provide more details about how you found the child." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. On the way home, Barbara couldn't hide her concern about her brother's behavior. "Richard, I know you're going through a tough time with the divorce and everything, but you can't get attached to this child. It won't fix your family problems." "It's not that, Barbara. It's just, when I held that baby, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time, like I had a greater purpose in life beyond just making money." "You have 2 children, Richard. Why not try reconnecting with them first?" His sister's words echoed in Richard's mind all night. He barely slept, thinking about the baby alone in the hospital. The next morning, instead of heading straight to the office as he had for decades, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Richard drove to the hospital at 7 a.m., carrying a bag of diapers, clothes, and other baby supplies he'd bought at a 24-hour pharmacy. The morning nurse was surprised to see him so early. "I came to check how the baby did overnight," he explained, trying to sound casual. "He's fine, Mr. Thompson. He cried a little in the early hours, but he's sleeping now." "Did you bring things for him?" Richard looked down at the bag in his hands, realizing how impulsive he'd been. "I thought he might need them. I don't know much about babies, but..." The nurse smiled warmly. "Do you have children?" "I have two, but they're grown now. I wasn't around much when they were little." In the nursery, Richard watched the baby sleeping peacefully. There was something mesmerizing about this tiny creature, so vulnerable yet so full of potential. He stayed there for over an hour until his phone began ringing insistently. It was Carol, his secretary, worried because he'd missed an important meeting with foreign investors. "Mr. Thompson, are you all right? You've never missed a meeting without notice." "Carol, cancel all my appointments today. I have something important to take care of." "But sir, the investors came all the way from New York. Mr. Mark has been trying to reach you since 8 this morning." Mark Wilson was his minority business partner, an ambitious man who had been questioning Richard's decisions lately. His unexpected absence would only fuel Mark's criticisms. Richard hung up and turned his attention back to the baby, who had woken up and was watching him with curious eyes. When he held out his pinky finger, the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "What will you name him?" the nurse asked softly, having approached unnoticed. "Me? No, I'm not. I mean, we still don't know if someone will come forward for him. But in the meantime, he needs a temporary name for medical records." Richard thought for a moment. "Ethan. You can put Ethan." Over the next few days, Richard settled into a routine he'd never had before. In the mornings, he visited Ethan at the hospital before work. During lunch, he returned to see him again. And at night, he was always the last visitor before heading home. The company began to feel his absence. Meetings were rescheduled, contracts were delayed, and Mark took the opportunity to openly question Richard's leadership. "He's going through a personal crisis," Mark commented to other employees. "Maybe it's time to consider a more effective leadership transition." On the 5th day, Dr. Carol Miller called Richard in for a serious talk. "Mr. Thompson, I need to discuss Ethan's situation. No one has come forward looking for him, and the legal procedures are underway. He'll be transferred to a temporary foster home until an adoptive family is found." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What if I wanted to keep him? Are you talking about adoption?" "I don't know, maybe. Is it possible?" "It's a complex process, Mr. Thompson. There are strict criteria, psychological evaluations, home visits, and you're single, which could complicate things. Separated, I'm getting divorced. That will also be a factor. Significant changes in your personal life can affect the assessment." Richard left the hospital with his mind in turmoil. For the first time in many years, he faced a situation he couldn't resolve simply by signing a check or calling the right person. At home, he called Barbara, who didn't hide her concern. "Richard, are you sure about this? Adopting a child is a huge responsibility. You barely managed to raise your own kids." "That's exactly why, Barbara. This could be my chance to do things differently." "What about the company?" "You can't drop everything because of an emotional impulse. The company isn't going anywhere. Mark can think whatever he wants." But Mark was thinking much further than Richard imagined. His partner had scheduled a meeting with key investors to discuss the company's future without consulting Richard. His strategy was simple: sow doubts about the majority partner's emotional stability and propose a corporate restructuring. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office to find a meeting taking place in his own office. Mark, dressed in an impeccable suit, was animatedly gesturing to 3 middle-aged men Richard recognized as representatives of the company's biggest clients. "Richard, so glad you're here. We were just discussing ongoing projects," Mark said, standing with a fake smile. In my office, without telling me. I tried calling you several times yesterday, but you didn't answer. The clients were concerned about delays in project approvals. Richard realized he was being tested. His years of business experience warned him what was happening, but his mind was torn between company issues and Ethan's situation. Gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm dealing with a personal matter that requires my attention, but it won't affect the quality of our work. One of the clients, Mr. Peterson, a businessman known for his tough stance in negotiations, spoke up. Richard, we've known each other for 15 years. I've never seen you miss a meeting or put a project on the back burner. Is everything all right? Yes, Peterson. Just an unexpected family matter. Family? I thought you were getting divorced, another client remarked. Mark seized the moment. That's exactly what concerns us. Richard is going through significant personal changes that could affect his ability to lead the company. Mark, this is something we should discuss privately, Richard said, trying to keep his composure. Of course. We just want to ensure our projects are in good hands. After the clients left, Richard confronted Mark in his office. What exactly are you trying to do? I'm protecting our company, Richard. You disappeared for an entire week, cancelled important meetings, and now I'm told you're thinking of adopting a child in the middle of a divorce. This isn't the behavior of someone fit to lead a multi-million-dollar company. My personal life is none of your business. It is when it affects the business. We have million-dollar contracts pending, employees depending on us, and you're having a midlife crisis. Richard felt his anger rising, but he knew Mark wasn't entirely wrong. His dedication to the company had waned since he found Ethan, and everyone had noticed. I'll handle this, Mark. Don't worry about it. I hope so, because if you don't, I'll have to make some tough decisions to protect our interests. The threat was clear. Mark was positioning himself for a power grab, taking advantage of Richard's vulnerability. That afternoon, Richard returned to the hospital earlier than usual. Ethan had visibly grown in the past few days and seemed to recognize him when he approached the crib. The nurse mentioned the baby grew restless when Richard didn't show up at his usual time. He's already gotten used to you, she said, smiling. And I to him. Dr. Carol Miller appeared with a serious expression. Mr. Thompson, I need to update you on the legal situation. Another family has filed for Ethan's adoption. They've passed the first stage and want to meet him tomorrow. Richard felt his world crumbling. But I said I was interested in adopting him. Yes, but you haven't started the official process. This family has been in the system for 2 years, waiting for a child. Their case is much further along. What kind of family? I can't share specifics, but they're a young couple, married for 6 years, no biological children. Financially stable with all evaluations approved. Richard sank heavily into a chair in the hospital hallway. Everything was slipping out of his control at once. The company, Ethan, his personal life. For the first time in decades, he felt completely lost. Ethan began crying in his crib, as if sensing the tension. Richard stood and lifted him, feeling the baby calm instantly against his chest. Doctor, is there any way to speed up my adoption process? It's possible, but it would be very hard to compete with a family already in the system this long. And frankly, your current personal situation isn't ideal for a quick adoption. Richard spent the rest of the afternoon at the hospital, holding Ethan and weighing his options. For the first time in his life, money and influence couldn't solve an immediate problem. He'd have to fight for something he truly wanted, and he wasn't sure he had the strength. When he got home that night, he was met with a surprise. Nancy, his soon-to-be ex-wife, was sitting in the living room waiting for him. Nancy, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Richard. The kids told me a strange story about you and an abandoned baby. How did they find out? Barbara told Jennifer. You know how our family is, nothing stays secret for long. Nancy was 49 and had dedicated over 20 years of her life to raising their family, while Richard built his business empire. She was an elegant woman, but her eyes carried the sorrow of someone long neglected. Richard, what's happening? To you? First this whole divorce mess, now this obsession with a child who isn't even yours. It's not an obsession, Nancy. It's hard to explain. Try. because the whole city is talking about how businessman Richard Thompson is having a nervous breakdown. Richard poured himself a whiskey and sat across from his ex-wife. When I found that baby, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a real connection with another human being. Something that made me realize how much I missed with our own children. Our children grew up, Richard. You missed out because you chose to work 16 hours a day instead of being present. I know that, and I regret it every single day. And now you think you can make up for it by adopting some random child. He's not a random child, it's Ethan, and he needs me. He needs a stable family, Richard, not a 55-year-old man going through a midlife crisis. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael and Jennifer. Richard's 2 children had inherited their mother's beauty and their father's determination, but they had maintained a distant relationship with him for years. "Dad, we need to talk about this baby situation." Michael got straight to the point, as he always did in his work as a lawyer. "What situation? Don't pretend you don't." "No, the whole town is talking about it." "You're embarrassing our family," Jennifer said, more emotional than her brother. "Embarrassing? I saved a child's life." "Dad, you found an abandoned baby and now you're talking about adoption in the middle of your divorce. That's not normal," Michael said in his lawyer tone. "And what do you know about what's normal? When you were babies, I barely saw you because I was always working. Maybe now I have a chance to do things differently." "With us?" Jennifer stood up, visibly upset. "You had 25 years to do things differently with us. Where were you when I needed you in school? Where were you when Michael graduated from college?" "Jennifer, no, Dad. Where were you when I got married? You were late to my own ceremony because of some important meeting." Richard felt the weight of all his absences at once. Every missed event, every important moment he had sacrificed for business. "I was younger. I thought I was doing what was best for the family." "For the family?" Michael cut in. "You did it for your ego, Dad, to be the most successful businessman in town. We were just accessories to your image of success." "That's not true, isn't it? How often do you remember my age without having to think? Do you know Jennifer's favorite color? Do you know the name of my childhood best friend?" Richard stayed silent because he couldn't answer any of those questions. Nancy watched the scene with sadness. This was exactly why she had asked for the divorce. Richard always put work first and only noticed his family when something went wrong. "Richard, do you see what's happening? You're repeating the same pattern. Instead of trying to reconnect with the children you already have, you're running away to a fantasy with a child you don't even know." "It's not a fantasy. Ethan needs me." "Ethan needs a family, Dad. A real family, not a workaholic in crisis." Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. "You don't understand, We understand perfectly," Michael interrupted. "You're trying to buy a second chance because you know you messed up the first one. But life doesn't work that way." The argument was cut short by the ringing of Richard's phone. It was Barbara, and her voice sounded worried. "Richard, you need to come to the hospital now. Ethan has a high fever and the doctors are concerned." Richard didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and rushed out, leaving his family behind without a word of explanation. At the hospital, he found Ethan being examined by 2 pediatricians. The fever had spiked quickly, and the baby was crying inconsolably. "What happened?" Richard asked, visibly frantic. "It could be a simple infection, but in newborns anything can be serious," the doctor explained. "We'll run some tests to be sure." Richard stood by the crib as the nurses prepared Ethan for his tests. The child looked even smaller and more fragile than when he had first found him. For the next several hours, Richard didn't leave the hospital. Barbara arrived around midnight, bringing coffee and sandwiches he didn't even touch. "How is he?" "Stable, but still with a fever. The test results should come in tomorrow morning." "Richard, you need to go home and rest." "I can't leave. Him alone." "He's not alone. There's an entire medical team looking after him." "It's not the same, Barbara. When I wake up in the middle of the night, I worry if he's okay, if he's cold, if someone tended to him when he cried." Barbara studied her brother carefully. Over the past few days, she had seen a transformation in him that hadn't happened in decades. Richard had always been a determined and successful man, but also emotionally distant. Now, for the first time, she saw him vulnerable and genuinely concerned for someone else. You really care about this child, don't you? I care more than I ever thought possible. What about your family? Nancy and the kids came to talk to me today. They're very worried about you. They think I'm having a nervous breakdown. Are you? Richard thought about the question for a long moment. I don't know, Barbara. All I know is my life has completely changed since I found Ethan. For the first time in years, I wake up thinking about someone else before business. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Nancy thinks I'm running from reality. And do you think so? I think I'm trying to do something right for the first time in a long while. The next morning, Ethan's tests showed a simple viral infection that could be treated with medication. Richard's relief was visible to the entire medical team. Dr. Carol Miller arrived with updates about the adoption process. The family I mentioned yesterday wants to meet Ethan this afternoon. It's standard procedure before the final decision. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. And then, if all goes well, they could take him home as early as this week. This week? Mr. Thompson, I know you've grown attached to the child, but you must understand that Ethan's well-being comes first. This family can offer stability that, frankly, your current situation doesn't allow. Richard spent the rest of the morning at the hospital, watching Ethan sleep peacefully after his medication. That afternoon, the prospective adoptive family arrived. Amanda and Brandon Foster, a couple in their 30s who radiated stability and happiness. Amanda was a preschool teacher, and Brandon worked as an engineer. They approached Ethan's crib with visible care and tenderness. The woman teared up with emotion when she saw the child. He's beautiful, she whispered to her husband. He's exactly what we dreamed of, Brandon replied, extending his finger for Ethan to grasp. Richard watched the scene from a distance, feeling a mix of admiration and envy. That couple represented everything he was not: young, passionate, and ready to dedicate their lives entirely to a child. Dr. Carroll approached him. They're wonderful people. They've been trying to have children for 6 years and decided on adoption. Ethan would have everything he needs with them. I know. Mr. Thompson, may I offer a suggestion? Perhaps it's time to focus on reconnecting with your own family. Your grown children could still have a close relationship with you if both sides make the effort. Richard knew she was right, but the thought of letting Ethan go was unbearable. Over the past few days, the child had become the center of his existence, the only part of his life that made sense. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Richard returned home for the first time in days, finding a message from Mark on the answering machine. His business partner had scheduled an emergency meeting with the board of directors for the next day, citing urgent concerns about the company's leadership. Richard immediately called his personal attorney, Dr. Howard Mitchell, a seasoned man who had handled his affairs for over 15 years. Howard, I need to know my rights regarding the company. Mark is trying to pull a power move. Richard, I spoke with some colleagues today. People are talking about changes in your behavior. Mark has been using it to question your leadership ability. And legally. You're the majority partner, but if they can prove mental or emotional instability, there could be complications, especially with your marital situation unresolved and now this baby situation. Baby situation? Is that what they're calling it? Richard, I'm your friend as well as your lawyer. I need to be honest with you. Your obsession with this child is damaging your public and professional image. It's not an obsession. Then what is it? You abandoned the company. You're getting divorced, you fought with your kids, and now you want to adopt a child in the middle of chaos. That doesn't sound like the actions of someone stable. Richard hung up without responding. It seemed everyone around him had decided he was crazy, but no one tried to understand what he was truly feeling. The next morning, he arrived at the office determined to regain control. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and Richard knew it would be a direct confrontation with Mark. Carol, his secretary of 15 years, greeted him with a worried look. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Wilson came in early today. He brought Some documents and has been meeting with the finance team since 8. What kind of documents? I'm not sure, but I overheard talk about corporate restructuring and leadership concerns. Richard went straight to his office and began reviewing the company's partnership agreements. As the majority shareholder with 60% of the stock, he technically had absolute control. But Mark was clever and had surely found some loophole to exploit. At 10 sharp, Richard entered the conference room where Mark and the 5 board members were waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. "Good morning, gentlemen. I apologize for the disruptions of the past few days, but I'm here to clarify any doubts about this company's leadership." Mark stood with a calculated smile. "Richard, glad you could make it. We were just discussing the need for some structural changes to ensure the stability of our business." "What kind of changes?" The company's attorney, Dr. Jenkins, spoke up. "Richard, the board is concerned about your recent absence and how it might affect our credibility with clients and investors. 1 week absent in 15 years is grounds to question my leadership." "It's not just the absence," Mark interjected. "It's the erratic behavior, the impulsive decisions, the personal instability. Our clients are losing confidence." "Which clients?" "Peterson, for example. He called yesterday asking if it wouldn't be better to transfer his projects to another firm." Richard felt a blow to his gut. Peterson was one of the company's biggest clients, responsible for nearly 20% of annual revenue. "So what's your proposal, Mark?" "A gradual transition of responsibilities. You'd remain the majority partner, but I'd take over day-to-day operations until your personal situation stabilizes. And who decides when my situation is stable?" "The board would, based on objective evaluations." Richard saw the trap. Mark was proposing an elegant scheme, keeping him as a figurehead while taking real control of the company. "Gentlemen, I appreciate the concern, but I see no need for structural changes. I'm resuming my normal duties starting today." "Richard," Dr. Jenkins spoke up again, "legally, if the board believes there's a risk to the company, they can request an independent medical evaluation of your leadership capacity." The threat was clear. Richard was being blackmailed by his own team. "Very well, you want proof of leadership, I'll give it to you." Richard stood and faced each board member. "From today onward, every decision about this company goes through me personally. Mark, you're suspended from your executive duties until further notice." "You can't do this, sir." "I can, and I am. I'm the majority shareholder and president of this company." "Richard, this is a rash decision." Dr. Jenkins tried to mediate. "Rash? Mark has been conspiring against me for weeks, taking advantage of a difficult personal moment. That's not partnership. It's betrayal." Mark was visibly angry, but kept his composure. "Richard, you're proving exactly what I said. Erratic behavior and impulsive decisions. The board will hear about this. The board can hear whatever they like. As long as I own most of this company, the decisions are mine." The meeting ended tensely, with Richard realizing he'd won a battle, but not the war. Mark would leave, even more determined to find a way to remove him from power. Back in his office, Richard found a stack of contracts to review and calls to return. For the first time in days, he threw himself into work with his old intensity, trying to prove to himself and others that he was in control. But his focus didn't last. Every half hour, he caught himself thinking about Ethan, wondering how the child was doing in the hospital. The meeting with the family interested in adoption had been the day before, and Richard didn't know the outcome. By 3 in the afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore and called the hospital. "How's Ethan today?" "He's doing well, Mr. Thompson. The fever's completely gone and he's eating normally." "And the family who visited him yesterday?" "Oh yes, they were delighted. They've already started the final paperwork to take him home." Richard felt as if a piece of his heart had been torn out. "When?" "Probably tomorrow or Friday at the latest." Can I see him today?" "Of course, Mr. Thompson. But you might want to prepare to say goodbye." The rest of the afternoon passed in slow motion. Richard tried to focus on work, but his mind was entirely fixed on the fact that Ethan would soon be gone from his life forever. At 6 in the evening, he left the office and went straight to the hospital. Ethan was awake in his crib, moving his little arms and looking stronger than in previous days. When Richard approached, The child smiled for the first time, a tiny but unmistakable smile. "He smiled at me." Richard called the nurse emotional. "Yes, he's done that a few times today. He's developing very well." Richard picked Ethan up and sat in the chair beside the crib. The child nestled against his chest and closed his eyes, completely relaxed. "You know, Ethan, maybe this is for the best. That family can give you everything I can't. They're young, they have time to devote just to you, no company in. Crisis? No children who hate them." Ethan fell asleep in his arms as Richard spoke softly. "But I want you to know these last few days have been the best I've had in a long time. You reminded me what really matters." Dr. Carroll appeared at the door. "Mr. Thompson, may I speak with you?" Richard settled Ethan in the crib and stepped out into the hallway. "The foster family wants to take Ethan tomorrow morning. All the paperwork has been approved. I understand. Sir, I know this isn't easy, but what you did for this child was truly beautiful. Ethan will have a wonderful life because of you." Richard nodded, unable to speak. He returned to Ethan's side and stayed there late into the night, knowing it would be one of the last times he'd see the boy. At home, he was met with a surprise. Barbara was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "I thought you could use a home-cooked meal tonight." "Barbara, you didn't have to." "Of course I did. You're in a terrible state, Richard. When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" Richard realized he couldn't remember. For days, he'd lived on hospital coffee and sandwiches. Over dinner, Barbara kept the conversation light, avoiding any mention of Ethan or the company. But Richard couldn't focus on anything except the fact that tomorrow he'd lose the child who had become the center of his world. "Barbara, do you think I've lost my mind?" "Lost your mind? No. Confused? Absolutely. Everyone says I'm having a breakdown, that my behavior isn't normal. Richard, you have changed, that's true, but not necessarily for the worse. For the first time in years, I see you genuinely caring about someone else. But maybe they're right. Maybe I'm trying to make up for my failures as a father through Ethan. And if you are, does that make your feelings any less real?" Richard considered the question. "Nancy thinks so. Nancy has her own pain and resentment right now. She can't see past it. And the kids? Michael and Jennifer are wounded adults trying to protect themselves. They grew up feeling rejected by you, Richard. Of course they'd question this change. So what should I do?" "Follow your heart. But remember, whatever you decide will have consequences you'll live with for the rest of your life." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of every choice he'd ever made. His career, his marriage, his relationship with his children, and now Ethan. By morning, he arrived at the hospital before 8. Ethan was being dressed in new clothes the Fosters had brought. The boy looked even smaller in the oversized outfit. Amanda and Brandon arrived promptly at 9, carrying a new car seat and radiating joy. Richard watched from a distance as they signed the final papers and received instructions from the medical staff. "Mr. Thompson?" Amanda approached him with Ethan in her arms. "The doctor told us you were the one who found Ethan. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts." Richard looked at the boy, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Take good care of him. We'll love him as if he were our own," Brandon said. "You're welcome to visit any time." "Thank you, but I think it's best he starts fresh. No ties to the past." Amanda heard the emotion in Richard's voice. "Sir, Ethan was very lucky to have found someone like you. Few men would have cared so much for a stranger's child." Richard walked them to the hospital exit. Ethan woke just as they buckled him into the car and stared straight at Richard through the window. For a moment, Richard wanted to run after them and beg to take the boy back, but he held himself still. The car drove off, carrying Ethan to his new life. Richard stood on the sidewalk until it vanished from sight. For the first time in decades, he wept openly, not caring who saw. Barbara appeared by his side and embraced him in silence. They stayed like that for several minutes, Richard crying, while she offered the silent comfort of someone who understands pain without needing words. "Let's go home," Barbara whispered finally. "I can't, Barbara. I have to go to work. Mark is waiting for any sign of weakness to attack me again." "Richard, you just went through a significant emotional loss. No one would expect you to work today. I expect it of myself. At the office, Richard tried to immerse himself in his work with even more intensity than the day before. He reviewed contracts, took calls, attended meetings, all in a desperate attempt to fill the void Ethan had left. Mark watched from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike again. He knew Richard was emotionally shaken and that it could be used to his advantage. Around noon, Carol entered Richard's office with a worried look. "Mr. Richard, some articles about the company have appeared in the local papers. You should take a look." Richard picked up the newspapers and felt his stomach drop. The headlines were variations of the same theme: "Businessman in crisis abandons work for baby," and "Richard Thompson, professional success, personal failure." The articles described in detail his obsession with Ethan, the problems at the company, the divorce, and painted a picture of a man in total collapse. Mark had leaked information to the press. Richard immediately called his lawyer. "Howard, have you seen the papers?" "I have, Richard. The situation is getting complicated. Mark is playing hardball. Can I sue him for defamation?" "Technically, he hasn't said anything that isn't true. You did step away from the company, you are getting divorced, and you did try to adopt an abandoned child. So there's nothing I can do? You can try to repair your public image and prove you're in control of the situation, but that will take time." Richard hung up the phone and looked out his office window. Down below, he could see people on the street reading the papers, probably discussing his personal life. The rest of the day was a series of calls from concerned clients, suppliers questioning the company's stability, and employees whispering in the halls. Richard felt as if he were on public display, being judged for every decision he'd made. By 6 in the evening, he was mentally and emotionally exhausted. He left the office, ignoring the curious glances of his employees, and went home, only to find another unpleasant surprise. Nancy was there again, but this time she wasn't alone. Michael and Jennifer were with her, and they all wore serious expressions. "Richard, we need to talk." Nancy got straight to the point. "If it's about the papers, I already know. Everything." "It's not just about the papers," Michael spoke up. "It's about our family. You're destroying the Thompson name with this behavior." "My behavior? Do you know what really happened? Or did you just read the twisted versions in the press? Dad, you abandoned a multi-million-dollar company to play father with a child you didn't even know." Jennifer was visibly upset. "I didn't abandon anything, and Ethan wasn't a game." "Ethan?" Nancy repeated the name with disdain. "You gave the child a name as if he were your own?" "He needed a name for medical records." "Dad, do you hear how this sounds?" Michael used his lawyer's tone. A 55-year-old man going through a divorce, abandoning his business to latch onto a random baby. "He wasn't random, I saved him. And you did a beautiful thing," Nancy acknowledged. "But you should have stopped there. Hand the child over to the authorities and return to your normal life." "My normal life? What normal life?" "Nancy, working 16 hours a day at a company that gives me no joy anymore. Coming home alone every night, pretending I have a family when my own children barely speak to me." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard had touched the raw nerve of all their family relationships. Jennifer was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Dad, if you wanted a present family, why didn't you try when we were little?" "Because I was young and foolish and thought money solved everything. I believed working harder would give you a better life." "We didn't want a better life, Dad. We wanted a present father," Michael said with rare emotion. "I know that now, and I regret it every day. Then why not try to reconnect with us instead of escaping into a fantasy with a child who isn't even yours?" Nancy asked. Richard looked at each of them and saw years of hurt and resentment piled up. "Because with Ethan, I had a chance to start over. With you, I have to carry the weight of 25 years of mistakes. And you think running away is easier than trying to fix things?" Jennifer was crying now. "It's not running away, Jennifer. It was an opportunity to do things differently." "Was?" Nancy caught the past tense. "Ethan was adopted today by a real family, one that can give him everything he deserves." Silence filled the room again. This time Nancy spoke first. "Richard, I'm sorry. I know you grew attached to the boy." "Attached?" Richard laughed bitterly. "I loved him more in a week than I ever thought possible to love anyone." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, surprised by their father's emotional intensity. "Dad, we've never heard you talk like this about love," Jennifer whispered, "because you've only known me focused on business. Ethan showed me a part of myself I'd forgotten existed." "And now?" Michael asked. "Now I don't know. I lost Ethan. I'm losing the company to Mark. You all hate me. Nancy wants a divorce. I don't even know who I am without work." Nancy stood and moved, closer to Richard. "We don't hate you, Richard. We're hurt, which is different. Hurt can heal with time and effort." "What about the company?" Jennifer asked. "The company was always my identity. Without it, I don't know who I am." "Maybe it's time to find out," Michael suggested. The conversation stretched late into the night, with each airing years of pain and frustration. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was the first step toward honest communication the Thompson family hadn't had in decades. When everyone left, Richard stood alone in his silent house, reflecting on all that had been said. For the first time, he seriously considered making drastic changes in his life. The next day, he arrived at the office determined to regain control from Mark, but he was met with an unpleasant surprise. Several key employees had resigned overnight, citing uncertainty about the company's future. Carol was visibly shaken. "Mr. Thompson, almost the entire project team left. They said they got better offers elsewhere." "What other companies?" "Apparently it's a new firm Mark is setting up." Richard felt his blood boil. Mark wasn't just trying to take over, he was stealing employees to start a competing business. He immediately called Mark, who answered with false cheer. "Richard, how are you? Saw the news yesterday." "Mark, what do you think you're doing?" "What are you talking about?" "My employees are leaving to work for your company." "Oh, that." "Richard, they're skilled professionals looking for stability. With all the uncertainty at our company, it's natural they'd seek alternatives." "Our company? You were suspended, remember?" "A temporary suspension that the board has already reversed. In fact, we have a meeting at 3 o'clock to discuss some structural changes." Richard angrily hung up the phone. Mark was playing a very well-orchestrated game, using every weakness and every mistake to take control. The 3 o'clock meeting was a massacre. The board had decided, based on recent events and the negative media exposure, that Richard needed to step away from the company's operations temporarily. "It's a protective measure, Richard," Dr. Jenkins explained, "for both you and the company." "Protection? You're removing me from my own company." "We're not removing you, we're suggesting you focus on resolving your personal issues while Mark handles daily operations." "For how long?" "Until the situation stabilizes." "And who decides when it's stabilized?" "The board, along with an independent medical evaluation." Richard realized he was being gracefully pushed out of his own company. Mark had gotten what he wanted by using his emotional vulnerability against him. "Fine," Richard stood up. "But remember, I'm still the majority shareholder. You can take me out of operations, but you can't take me out of ownership." "Of course not, Richard. No one is questioning that." But Richard knew it was only a matter of time before Mark found a way to challenge even that. He left the office that afternoon feeling utterly defeated. In a single week, he had lost Ethan, been removed from the company, and realized his family saw him as a stranger. At home, he called Barbara, who came immediately. "Richard, you look awful." "I've lost everything, Barbara, literally everything." "You haven't lost everything. You've lost some things and gained perspective on others." "What perspective? That I'm a failure as a father, a husband, and now as a businessman? That you're a flawed human being like anyone else? And that you still have time to change what you don't like about your life?" "I'm 55, Barbara. Not exactly the best time to start over." "It's the time you have. The question is, what will you do with it?" Richard spent the following days in a kind of limbo. With no Ethan to visit, no company to run, and his family still processing recent conversations, he found himself with free time for the first time in decades. At first, he tried to fill the void with activities he'd neglected for years, reading books that had sat on his shelf untouched, organizing personal papers, even attempting to cook a few meals. But the emotional emptiness remained. Ethan had awakened in him a capacity to love he hadn't known he possessed, and now that love had nowhere to go. A week after his removal from the company, Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. He went to the hospital where he'd met Ethan. He wasn't there to visit the child. He knew Ethan was doing well with his new family. He wanted to speak with Dr. Carol Miller about volunteering in the pediatric ward. "Mr. Thompson, what a surprise to see you here." "Doctor, I was wondering if you need volunteers to help with the children here." Dr. Carroll studied him curiously. "May I ask what motivated this?" "Ethan showed me something about myself I didn't know existed. I thought maybe I could use that to help other children. It's a beautiful initiative, but volunteer work with children requires preparation and psychological evaluation. I'm willing to go through any necessary process. It also requires consistent time and dedication. It's not something you can do sporadically. I have time now, a lot of time." Dr. Carroll studied Richard for a moment. "All right, I'll refer you to our volunteer coordinator. But I must warn you, working with hospitalized children can be emotionally very challenging. More challenging than losing a child you loved. Perhaps not more challenging, but different. Here you'll see suffering, fear, and you won't always be able to do much to help." Richard spent the afternoon filling out forms and talking with the volunteer coordinator, a woman named Deborah who had dedicated 15 years of her life to social work. "Mr. Thompson, may I be frank with you? Please. I read about your situation in the papers. I'm concerned you might be seeking volunteer work for the wrong reasons." "What wrong reasons?" "As a way to replace a personal loss, volunteer work isn't personal therapy. It's about helping others, not healing our own wounds." Richard thought about her words. "What if it's a little of both? If I can help others while also finding purpose for my life, then it might work. But you need to understand there will be strict rules, schedules to follow, and the children's well-being always comes first." "I understand completely. The approval process would take a few weeks, including a background check, psychological evaluation, and a training period." Richard signed up for everything, feeling for the first time in weeks a glimmer of purpose. While waiting for the volunteer process, he began receiving strange calls. Old clients from the company reaching out to him directly, worried about the quality of service they were getting under Mark's leadership. The first was Peterson, ironically the same man who had questioned his leadership abilities weeks earlier. "Richard, I need to talk to you about the shopping center project." "Peterson, you know I'm no longer actively running the company." "I do, and that's exactly why I'm calling. Mark is doing a terrible job. Deadlines are being missed, quality has dropped, and he won't return my calls." "And what do you want me to do?" "Take back control of your company before it goes under." Other similar calls followed. Richard realized that Mark, despite his ambition and political skill, lacked the experience and network needed to keep the company running at the level clients expected. But Richard also knew he couldn't just return. The board had been clear about the conditions for his comeback, and Mark had surely prepared to resist any attempt to regain control. The situation reached a breaking point when Richard got a call from his personal accountant, warning that Mark was trying to use the company's financial struggles to force a stock sale. "Richard, he's arguing that as a minority shareholder, he has the right to protect his investment if the company is at risk." "Does he?" "Legally, it's a gray area, but if he can prove mismanagement by the majority shareholder, he might have a case." "Mismanagement? I built this company from scratch." "Yes, but your absence and the problems of the last few months could be interpreted as abandonment of fiduciary duties." Richard realized he needed to act fast. Mark was using his absence to destroy the company from within, forcing him to sell his shares or return under even worse conditions. That night, he had a long conversation with Barbara about his options. "Richard, maybe it's time to seriously consider leaving the company." "Leaving? Barbara, this company is my life." "It was your life, but you said yourself you didn't know who you were without it. Maybe it's time to find out." "And do what? Become a full-time volunteer?" "Why not? You have enough money to live comfortably without working. You could dedicate yourself to causes that truly matter to you. But the company will survive without you, Richard. Maybe not as well, but it will survive. The question is, will you survive without it? Richard spent the whole night thinking about his sister's suggestion. Part of him knew Barbara was right. He had defined himself so much by the company that he no longer knew who he was without it. But another part couldn't accept the idea of handing over everything he had built to Mark. The next day, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He called Mark and scheduled a meeting. "Richard, so good to hear your voice. How have you been?" "Mark, let's drop the act. We both know exactly what you're doing." "What are you talking about?" "You're sabotaging the company from the inside to force me to sell my shares. It's a smart strategy, I'll admit." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Richard, I'm just trying to keep the company running in your absence." "Of course you are. Let's meet at the office tomorrow. We need to talk about the future." The meeting was tense from the start. Richard arrived with his lawyer and Mark brought his own. It was clearly a negotiation, not a friendly chat. "Mark, you want my share of the company, and I'm tired of fighting for it. Let's talk numbers." Mark tried to hide his surprise but didn't quite succeed. "Richard, I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. How much are you willing to pay for my shares?" The negotiations dragged on for days. Mark wanted to pay as little as possible, arguing that the company had lost value due to recent troubles. Richard, however, knew the real worth of the contracts and client portfolio. Finally, they reached an agreement that, while not ideal for Richard, was fair under the circumstances. He would sell his shares for an amount that would secure his financial future for life, and Mark would take full control of the company. On the day the contracts were signed, Richard felt a mix of relief and sadness. He was freeing himself from years of stress and responsibility, but he was also closing a chapter that had spanned over 2 decades of his life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, with the sale of the company finalized, Richard found himself in a position he'd never experienced before, with plenty of free time and enough financial resources to do anything he wanted. The approval process for volunteering at the hospital was complete, and he began working 3 days a week in the pediatric ward. At first, his tasks were simple: reading stories to the children, helping during mealtimes, or just talking to those who were alone. Richard discovered he had a natural talent for working with kids, perhaps developed during his days with Ethan. He was patient, kind, and the children seemed at ease around him. One of the first children he formed a special bond with was an 8-year-old girl named Sophia, who had been hospitalized for weeks with a chronic illness, requiring long-term treatment. Her parents worked and could only visit on weekends, so she spent most of her time alone. "Uncle Richard, do you have kids?" Sophia asked during one of his visits. "I do, Sophia. 2 children, but they're grown now." "Any grandchildren?" "No, not yet. When I grow up, I'll have lots of kids, so they're never alone like me." The girl's innocence touched Richard deeply. He started spending more time with her, helping with her hospital studies and inventing games to make the days less monotonous. Dr. Deborah, the volunteer coordinator, noticed Richard's special involvement with Sophia. "Mr. Thompson, may I speak with you?" "Of course. I've noticed you've been dedicating a lot of attention to Sophia specifically. It's important to maintain a professional relationship with all the children. I understand your concern, but Sophia is more alone than the other kids. I thought she needed extra care, and she does, but we must be careful, so neither of you develops overly strong emotional attachments. Volunteer work isn't about creating dependency." Richard understood the warning, but couldn't distance himself completely from Sophia. The girl reminded him of Ethan in her vulnerability, and he felt an almost paternal need to protect her. During this time, his relationship with his family also began to change. Michael and Jennifer started visiting him more often, curious about his new routine. "Dad, it's strange seeing you without a rush, without your phone ringing constantly," Jennifer remarked one Sunday they spent together. "It's strange for me, too. I still wake up at 6 sometimes thinking I have meetings to attend." and you don't miss it. I miss the feeling of being useful, of having purpose. But I don't miss the constant stress. What about the hospital work? Michael asked. It's different. There I help because I want to, not because I have to meet targets or close deals. Daddy, can I ask you something? Jennifer used the affectionate term she hadn't used in years. Of course. Do you think you'd be a better father now than when we were little? The question caught Richard off guard. I think so. Now I understand that presence matters more than presence. And why couldn't you see that before? Because I was too focused on being a financial provider. I thought my responsibility was ensuring you had everything I didn't in childhood. And what didn't you have in childhood? Financial security. My father lost his job when I was 12 and we struggled for years. I promised myself my kids would never go through that. But in the process, you forgot we also didn't have a present father, Michael observed. That's true, and I regret it every day. The conversation marked a turning point in Richard's relationship with his children. For the first time, they spoke openly about past frustrations and hurts without accusations or defensiveness. Jennifer suggested family therapy, an idea Richard initially resisted but eventually accepted. The sessions were difficult, with each airing years of accumulated resentment, but they were also freeing. During one session, the therapist asked Richard, "How would you like your relationship with your children to be moving forward?" "I'd like to be the father they always deserved, present, available, genuinely interested in their lives." "And you?" she asked Michael and Jennifer. "I want to have a real father," Jennifer answered, tears in her eyes. "I want to call my dad when I need advice, not just when I need money," Michael added. The family therapy continued for months, and gradually, the Thompsons began reconnecting in a way they hadn't in decades. Richard also kept occasional contact with Nancy, who had decided not to proceed immediately with the divorce after seeing the changes in him. "Richard, you're different," she commented during a dinner to discuss separation terms. "Different? How?" "More present, more human. For the first time in years, when I talk to you, I feel you're actually listening. Maybe because now I have time to really listen. It's more than that. You were always mentally somewhere else, even when physically present. And now? Now you seem to be where you truly belong." Nancy decided to postpone the divorce proceedings for a few months, curious to see if Richard's changes were permanent or just a phase. Meanwhile, Richard continued his work at the hospital, and his bond with Sophia deepened despite warnings from the administration. The girl had become like a granddaughter to him, and he couldn't help feeling responsible for her well-being. One day, Sophia asked a question that caught Richard completely off guard. "Uncle Richard, if I didn't have parents, would you adopt me?" Richard was speechless for a moment. "Sophia, you have parents who love you very much." "I know, but they're almost never here. You're here every day. That's because it's my job to be here. It's not just a job, it's because you care about me." The girl's insight surprised Richard. She was right. Long ago, his work at the hospital had stopped being just volunteer work and had become a personal calling. That evening, Richard talked to Barbara about the situation. "Barbara, I think I'm getting too involved with one of the children at the hospital." "Sophia, the one you're always mentioning?" "Yes. She asked me something today that got me thinking." Richard recounted the conversation, and Barbara listened quietly. "Richard, you're doing the same thing you did with Ethan." "What do you mean?" "You're emotionally attaching yourself to a child who isn't yours, creating fantasies about being the father she needs." "They're not fantasies, Barbara. Sophia really needs more attention. And she gets attention from the whole medical team and other volunteers, but you're putting yourself in a special position. And what's wrong with that? The problem is that you're using these children to fill an emotional void of your own. That's not fair to you or to them." Barbara's words echoed in Richard's mind for days. He began questioning his motivations at the hospital, wondering if he was truly helping the children or just trying to heal his own emotional wounds. The answer came unexpectedly when Sophia was discharged. On the day she left with her parents, Richard felt a deep sadness, almost as if he were losing a daughter. "Uncle Richard, I'll miss you," Sophia said, hugging him as she left. I'll miss you too, sweetheart. Can I come visit you? Richard glanced at the girl's parents, who seemed slightly uncomfortable with the closeness between Richard and their daughter. Sophia, now you'll be home with Mom and Dad. You won't need to come to the hospital anymore. But can I come just to see you? We'll see, dear. After Sophia left, Richard was depressed for days. Dr. Deborah noticed the change in his behavior and asked to speak with him. Mr. Thompson, you're going through exactly what I feared when you started here. What do you mean? You're becoming too emotionally involved with the children. It's not healthy for you or for them. But isn't it natural to care about the people we look after? Caring, yes, but forming emotional dependency bonds, no. Sophia started seeing you as a substitute father figure, and that can be confusing for a child who already has parents. Richard knew she was right, but couldn't fully accept it. What do you suggest I do? Maybe it's time to consider a different kind of volunteer work, something that lets you help people without forming such close attachments. The conversation left Richard once again questioning his life's purpose. It seemed that every time he found something fulfilling, some problem or complication stopped him from moving forward. That night, he made a drastic decision. He would drastically reduce his time at the hospital and look for other ways to keep himself occupied. During the following weeks, Richard tried out various activities, painting classes, a book club, even some cooking lessons. But nothing gave him the sense of purpose he had felt while caring for Ethan and the children at the hospital. It was during this period of experimentation that he received an unexpected call. It was Amanda, Ethan's adoptive mother. Mr. Thompson, I hope you remember me. Of course, Amanda. How is Ethan? He's growing wonderfully. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Richard felt his heart race. Is he okay? He's fine physically, but something strange has been happening. Over the past few weeks, Ethan has been very restless, as if he's looking for someone. Looking for someone. It's hard to explain. He's only a few months old, but he seems to recognize people. And when he sees gray-haired men on the street, he gets very excited, as if he's trying to reach them. Richard felt a strange emotion rise in his chest. And we think maybe he misses you. I know it might seem impossible for such a small baby, but the doctors say infants can form very strong bonds in their first days of life. What would you like me to do? Brandon and I have talked a lot about this. We'd like to know if you'd be interested in being part of Ethan's life in some way. Richard fell silent, trying to process what he was hearing. How do you mean? As an adoptive grandfather, perhaps, someone who could visit him occasionally, be there, for important moments in his life. You really want that? We do. Ethan is our life now, and if having you around makes him happy, then we want that too. Richard began to cry on the phone, too moved to speak. Mr. Thompson, are you all right? I'm very well. It would be the most wonderful thing in the world for me. They arranged to meet the following weekend. Richard would spend the afternoon at Amanda and Brandon's home, spending time with Ethan. On the morning of the visit, Richard was more nervous than he had been in years. He bought some age-appropriate toys for Ethan and dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. The foster family's home was simple but cozy, clearly prepared with love for a child. Ethan was in the living room crib, bigger and more developed than Richard remembered. When Richard approached, something magical happened. Ethan smiled immediately and reached out his little arms toward him, as if recognizing an old friend. "My goodness," Amanda whispered. "He never reacts like this with strangers." Richard picked Ethan up, and the child nestled against his chest just as he had in those first days at the hospital. It was as if no time had passed. "Hi, Ethan," Richard whispered. "I missed you, little one." Brandon and Amanda watched the scene with emotion. "Now we understand why he was so restless," Brandon remarked. "He really remembers you." Richard spent the entire afternoon playing with Ethan, who seemed happier and more relaxed than his adoptive parents had seen in weeks. When it was time to leave, Ethan began to cry, as if he understood Richard was going away. "Mr. Thompson," Amanda said as they said goodbye, "how about doing this every week? Ethan clearly benefits from your presence. Are you sure you don't mind? Not at all. We see how much good it does him. And honestly, it's comforting to know Ethan has someone who cares so much about him. Richard went home that night feeling whole for the first time in months. Ethan was well. He had a loving family, but there was still room in his life for Richard. It was exactly what he needed. In the weeks that followed, Richard established a routine of weekly visits to the Fosters. He would bring toys, help with some household chores, and spend hours playing with Ethan. The child always responded positively to his presence and seemed genuinely happy during the visits. Amanda and Brandon became more than hosts. They became true friends. Richard discovered they were facing some financial difficulties due to adoption costs and Ethan's care, and he discreetly began helping them. "Mr. Thompson, we can't accept this," Amanda protested when Richard offered to help buy a better car seat for Ethan. "Of course you can. Ethan is special to me too. Let me help take care of him. But we don't want you to feel obligated." "It's not obligation, Amanda. It's love. And when we love someone, we want the best for them." Gradually, Richard became a constant presence in Ethan's and the Foster family's life. He was there when Ethan first sat up on his own, when he said his first words, when he took his first steps. "Grandpa," Ethan said one day, pointing at Richard. The title came naturally. Unplanned, but it fit perfectly. Richard had become the grandfather Ethan would never have had otherwise. During this time, Richard's relationship with his own family continued to improve. Michael and Jennifer were initially surprised by the arrangement with Ethan, but gradually came to admire how their father had found a positive way to fulfill his need to care for someone. "Dad, you seem happier now than I've ever seen you in my life," Jennifer remarked during a family dinner. "I feel happier. I've finally found a balance between caring for someone and keeping a healthy distance." "How so?" "With Ethan, I can be the loving grandfather without the pressure of being the primary caregiver. I can give love and receive love without the anxiety of making irreparable mistakes." Michael, ever practical, made an important observation. "Dad, what happens when Ethan grows up? Will he understand you're not his biological grandfather?" Amanda and Brandon have always been honest about his story. "Ethan will know he was adopted and how we met, but that doesn't make our bond any less real. And aren't you afraid he might one day decide he doesn't want to see you anymore?" "I am, but I'd rather take that risk and have these wonderful moments with him than have nothing out of fear of loss." Richard's answer showed an emotional maturity he hadn't displayed before. He had learned to love without possessiveness, to care without trying to control. Nancy, who had been following Richard's changes through their children, decided to talk to him personally about the future of their marriage. "Richard, we need to make a decision about our relationship." "I know, Nancy. You've been very patient. It's just, you're so different now. More present, more emotionally available. Part of me wonders if we could try again." Richard thought carefully before answering. "Nancy, I've become a better person, that's true. But I've become someone different from the man you married. I don't know if we're compatible as the people we are today." "What do you mean?" "You married an ambitious businessman who put work above everything. I was predictable, financially stable, but emotionally distant. Now I'm a retired man who spends his free time caring for a baby who isn't my biological child. They're two very different people. And you don't think I could fall in love with this new version of you? I think we both deserve to discover who we are apart before deciding if we want to be together again." It was a mature and respectful conversation, very different from the bitter arguments that had marked the last years of their marriage. They decided to make the divorce official amicably, maintaining a cordial relationship as parents to their adult children. A year after meeting Ethan, Richard had found a life balance he never imagined possible. He had a routine that included morning exercises, reading, occasional volunteer work at the hospital, with healthier emotional boundaries, and most importantly, quality time with Ethan. The child had become the center of joy in his life, but not the only center. Richard had learned to distribute his affection and attention more evenly. One morning, while playing with Ethan in the backyard of the Foster's house, Richard reflected on all the changes that had happened in his life. "You know, Ethan, you saved me just as much as I saved you that night. Ethan, now over a year, Fold didn't understand the words but smiled and clapped, clearly happy with the attention. I was so lost, so empty. I thought my life was over when I lost the company, when I separated from your grandmother Nancy, when I realized I'd been a terrible father. Ethan picked up a toy and handed it to Richard, a simple gesture that moved him deeply. But you showed me it's never too late to start over, to learn to love differently. Amanda appeared on the porch with coffee for Richard. Talking to him again? She asked, smiling. He's my best listener, Richard replied. Richard, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you regret anything that's happened this past year? Richard thought for a moment. I regret not being a better father when I was younger. I regret taking so many years to learn what really matters in life. But I don't regret anything that's happened since I found Ethan. Not even losing your company? Especially losing my company. It was consuming me, turning me into someone I didn't like. Mark can keep it. And how is Mark? Have you heard from him? A little. From what I've heard, he's facing the same struggles I did. Unhappy clients, stressed employees, problematic contracts. The difference is, he doesn't have the experience or the relationships I spent decades building. You don't feel like going back? Not at all. My life is so much richer now than when I was working 16 hours a day. It was true. Richard had discovered simple pleasures he'd neglected for decades, reading an entire book in an afternoon, preparing a meal without rushing, having long, unhurried conversations with the people he loved. That weekend, Michael and Jennifer came to visit Ethan, something they'd started doing regularly. They'd become the child's unofficial uncle and aunt, and Ethan adored them. Dad, can I ask you something? Michael said as Ethan played. On the floor. Always. Do you think you'd be a good father now if you had a young child? I think I'd be a much better father than I was with you two. Why? Because Emily and I are thinking about having kids, and we want you to be a present grandfather this time. The revelation took Richard by surprise. Michael had been married to Emily for 3 years, but they'd never talked about children in front of Richard. Are you sure you want me to be a present grandfather? After everything? Dad, we've seen how you are with Ethan. We've seen how you've changed. We want our kids to know this version of you. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. It would be the greatest honor of my life. And mine too, Jennifer added. When Robert and I decide to have children, we want you there from day one. In that moment, Richard realized his life had come full circle. He had lost his identity as a successful businessman, but had gained a far richer one as a father, grandfather, and complete human being. Months later, Richard received an unexpected call that left him shocked. It was Dr. Howard, his former lawyer. Richard, I have news about Mark and the company. What news? He's facing serious financial trouble. He lost 3 major clients last month, and there are rumors he might have to declare bankruptcy. Bankruptcy? The company I spent 20 years building. Richard, Mark didn't have your experience or your network. He thought he could run the company as if it were just a matter of management, but he learned construction is all about trust and personal relationships. And what does this have to do with me? He wants to talk to you. He's willing to sell the company back for a fraction of what he paid. Richard fell silent for a long moment. Richard, are you there? I am, Howard. I'm just thinking. It's an incredible opportunity to get your company back for much less money. Howard, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I was happy when I ran the company? The lawyer hesitated before answering. You were successful, Richard, financially stable, professionally respected. But I asked if I was happy. Honestly, no. You always seemed stressed, tired, irritated. Even at your peak professional successes, you never seemed genuinely happy. Then why would I buy back something that didn't make me happy? There for the money, for the prestige, for the satisfaction of proving you can fix what Mark ruined? Howard, this morning, I played with Ethan in the backyard for 2 hours. I didn't think about money, contracts, or business problems. I just played with a child and was genuinely happy. Why would I trade that for 16 hours of daily stress? The lawyer went quiet. Tell Mark, I'm not interested in buying the company back. If he wants advice on handling specific clients, I can help as an occasional consultant, but I don't want the responsibility again. Richard, are you sure? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm absolutely sure, Howard. My life has never been as good as it is now. After hanging up, Richard sat on his porch looking at the garden he'd started cultivating, another hobby he'd discovered he had a talent for. His life was simpler, quieter, but infinitely richer emotionally. Ethan was about to turn 2, and Richard was planning a special birthday party. He had become not just the child's adoptive grandfather, but also an integral part of the extended family, which included Amanda, Brandon, their own children, and even Nancy, who had grown fond of Ethan. "Grandpa!" Ethan shouted from the Foster's house, running toward Richard with open arms. Richard scooped him up and spun him around, listening to the child's crystal-clear laughter. "Hi, sweetheart, how was your day?" "Good. Wanna play?" "We'll always play, Ethan. Always." As they played in the yard, Richard thought about how surprising life could be. A year and a half earlier, he'd been a stressed-out businessman going through a divorce with children who barely spoke to him. Now he was a man at peace with himself, with healthy family relationships and a life purpose that went far beyond financial success. "Uncle Richard," Amanda called from the kitchen. "Yes?" "Brandon and I wanted to talk to you about something." Richard set Ethan on the swing and went to the kitchen, where he found the couple with serious expressions. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing bad," Brandon quickly clarified. "Actually, it's something really good, but we'd like your opinion." "About what?" "We're thinking about having another child," Amanda revealed. "A biological one this time." Richard felt a mix of joy and apprehension. "This is wonderful. Why the serious faces?" "Because we wanted to know how you'd feel about it," Brandon explained. "Ethan wouldn't be an only child anymore, and we might need less of your help because we'd have more work with 2 kids. Richard laughed, relieved. "Are you worried I'd feel left out?" "A little," Amanda admitted. "Amanda, Brandon, Ethan having a little brother would be the most wonderful thing in the world, and I'd love helping with 2 grandchildren instead of 1. "2 grandchildren?" Brandon smiled. "Of course. If you'll let me, I'd be the adoptive grandfather to Ethan's little brother too." The relief on the couple's faces was visible. "Richard, you have no idea how happy we are to hear that," Amanda said, hugging him. "You've become my chosen family. Nothing would make me happier than seeing this family grow." That evening, Richard had dinner at the Foster's house, as he did several times a week. Ethan insisted on sitting next to him, and during the meal the child alternated between eating and showing his toys to Grandpa. After dinner, while Ethan slept, the 3 adults talked about future plans. "Richard, can I ask you a personal question?" Brandon said. "Always. Don't you ever feel lonely, living alone, without a partner?" Richard thought about the question. "Sometimes, especially at night. But it's a different loneliness than when I was married and felt isolated even with someone beside me." "Have you thought about being with someone again?" "I have, but I'm not actively looking. If it happens naturally, I'd welcome it. But I don't feel an urgent need." "Why?" Amanda asked. "Because my life is complete in other ways. I have a good relationship with my kids. I have Ethan and you 2. I have fulfilling activities. A romantic relationship would be a bonus, not a necessity." It was true. Richard had learned to be happy with himself, something he'd never managed before. His self-esteem no longer depended on external successes or others' approval. A few months later, Amanda became pregnant, and Richard was involved in the pregnancy almost as if he were the biological grandfather. He attended doctor's appointments, helped prepare the baby's room, and even took an infant first aid course. Ethan was excited about having a little sibling, though he didn't fully understand what it meant. "Grandpa, baby in Mommy's tummy," he'd say, pointing at Amanda's growing belly. "That's right, Ethan. You're going to be a very special big brother. I teach him play." "Yes, sweetheart. You'll be the best big brother in the world." During Amanda's pregnancy, Richard also received wonderful news. Emily, Michael's wife, was pregnant too. "Dad, you're going to be a biological grandfather and an adoptive grandfather almost at the same time," Michael joked. "And Jennifer's trying to get pregnant too," Richard revealed. "She told me yesterday. You're going to be the busiest." Grandpa in the United States. And the happiest. The prospect of having multiple grandchildren to care for genuinely excited Richard. He'd discovered a natural talent for childcare, something he'd never fully explored when his own children were young. Amanda and Brandon's baby was born on a spring morning, a girl they named Sophia, a tribute to the girl at the hospital who had meant so much to Richard. "Grandpa, this is my sister Sophia," Ethan announced proudly when Richard arrived at the hospital. "She's beautiful, Ethan. You'll take good care of her." "I will. I protect her from everything." Richard held little Sophia in his arms, remembering the first time he'd held Ethan. The same emotion, the same instant love, the same sense of purpose. "Welcome to the family, Sophia," he whispered to the baby. Amanda and Brandon watched the scene with tired but happy smiles. "Richard, we don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for our family," Amanda said. "There's no need to thank me. You've given me far more than I've given you." "How so?" "You've given me a family, a purpose, a reason to be a better person. Ethan and now Sophia have given me the chance to be the grandfather I always wanted to be." 3 months later, Richard's first biological grandchild was born, the son of Michael and Emily. They named him Matthew, and Richard was surprised to find that he felt no difference in the love he had for all 3 children. "Dad, Matthew looks just like you when you were a baby," Emily remarked, showing old family photos. "All babies look the same to me," Richard joked, "but Matthew is beautiful." "You don't feel any difference between him and Ethan and Sophia?" "None. Love is love, Emily. It doesn't matter if it's biological or adoptive." Emily smiled, visibly moved. "Michael was afraid you might favor Matthew because he's your biological grandson. Tell Michael he has nothing to worry about. I have enough love for all the grandchildren to come." And he truly did. Richard had discovered that his capacity to love was far greater than he'd ever imagined. For years, he had limited himself to superficial love because he was always focused on other things. Now, with time and attention to spare, he could love deeply and genuinely. Richard's routine became delightfully chaotic. He divided his time between the 3 children, helping Amanda with Ethan and Sophia during the week and spending weekends with Michael, Emily, and Matthew. Ethan, now 2.5, had become a protective and affectionate big brother. He helped care for Sophia and always included Matthew in playtime when the families got together. "Grandpa, is Matthew my cousin?" Ethan asked during a family lunch. "Not exactly, Ethan. Matthew is Michael's son, and Michael is my son. That would make Matthew your... well, it's complicated." "They're all heart siblings," Jennifer suggested with a smile. "Yes, heart siblings." Ethan loved the explanation. Richard looked around the table, seeing his 2 families, biological and adoptive, gathered harmoniously. Nancy was there too, having developed a warm relationship with Amanda and Brandon. "Nancy, don't you think it's strange to have grandchildren who aren't biologically yours?" Amanda asked. "At first I did, but now I can't imagine Ethan and Sophia not being part of our family. They're as much my grandchildren as Matthew will be." "And Richard, don't you think he's changed a lot?" Nancy looked at Richard, who was helping Ethan cut his food. "He's become the person he always had the potential to be, but never had the chance to be. Now I'm sure our divorce was the best decision for both of us." "Why?" "Because now we can be genuine friends without the pressures and expectations of marriage, and he can be the father and grandfather his children and grandchildren deserve." It was true. Richard and Nancy had developed a strong, respectful friendship, free from the pain and resentment that had marked the last years of their marriage. A few months later, Jennifer announced she was pregnant, and Richard prepared to welcome his 4th grandchild. His home had been adapted for regular visits from the children, with toys, portable cribs, and even a small playground in the backyard. "Dad, are you sure you're not overextending yourself?" Jennifer asked during a visit. "Overextending? Jennifer, for the first time in my life, I feel useful in a way that truly matters." "How so?" "When I ran the company, I built buildings. Now I'm helping build people. I'm helping shape the character, values, and childhood memories of these children. There's no more important work than that." Jennifer hugged her father, moved. "Dad, you know we forgive you for not being around when we were little, right?" "I know, sweetheart, but that doesn't lessen my regret. Maybe you needed to go through everything you did to become the person you are today. Maybe. But I wish I'd learned those lessons without hurting you all in the process. What matters is that you learned, and now your grandchildren will get the best version of you. Richard smiled, knowing she was right. His grandchildren would never know the workaholic, distant Richard. They'd only know the present, affectionate, and devoted grandfather. At the end of that year, Richard did something he hadn't done in decades. He hosted a Christmas dinner at his home for the entire extended family. Amanda, Brandon, Ethan, and Sophia. Michael, Emily, and Matthew. Jennifer and Robert. Nancy, Barbara. Even some close friends of the Fosters. The table was full. The house was filled with laughter and conversation. And Richard felt deeply grateful for everything that had happened in his life. "Grandpa, can I make a toast?" Ethan asked, raising his little juice cup. "Of course, Ethan. What do you want to toast to?" "I want to toast because Grandpa found me in the trash and now we're family." Everyone laughed at the child's honesty, but were also moved by the simplicity and depth of the toast. "To Ethan, who taught me it's never too late to learn how to truly love," Richard added, raising his glass. "To family," everyone said, in unison. That night, after everyone had left, Richard was alone in his house, picking up scattered toys and washing the last dishes. But he didn't feel alone. He felt part of something much bigger and more meaningful than anything he'd ever built before. His phone rang. It was Amanda. "Richard, we forgot Ethan's favorite teddy bear at your place. He can't sleep without it. I'll bring it right now." "You don't have to. We can pick it up tomorrow morning." "Of course I'll bring it. What kind of grandfather would I be if I left my grandson without his teddy bear on Christmas?" "Heave?" Richard drove through the quiet city to the Foster's house, carrying the stuffed bear Ethan had received on his first birthday. When he got there, he found Ethan still awake, clearly worried about his favorite toy. "Grandpa, you brought my teddy." "Of course I did, sweetheart. I wasn't going to let you sleep without it." Ethan hugged the bear tightly and then hugged Richard with all his might. "Grandpa, you're the best person in the world. And you're the best grandson in the world, Ethan." On the drive home, Richard thought about how his life had completely changed since that night he'd found a crying baby in a dumpster. He'd lost a company and gained a family. He'd lost a professional identity and gained a far richer human one. He'd learned that success wasn't measured just in money or prestige, but in genuine relationships and moments of simple joy. He'd discovered it was never too late to change, to grow, to become a better person. As he walked into his home that Christmas Eve, Richard looked up at the starry sky one last time and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not a prayer asking for things, but one thanking him for all he'd received, and most of all, for all he'd learned. His life wasn't perfect. He still regretted not being a better father when Michael and Jennifer were little. He still faced occasional financial challenges. He still felt lonely sometimes, but his life was complete in a way it had never been before. He had love, he had purpose, he had genuine relationships. He had the chance to be the grandfather he'd always wanted to be, and never knew he could be. And it had all started with a cry in the night, an abandoned baby, and the decision not to ignore another person's suffering. Richard had saved Ethan that night, but Ethan had saved Richard too. The next morning, he woke up early and went to the Foster's house to help prepare Christmas breakfast. Ethan ran to hug him as soon as he arrived. "Good morning, Grandpa, it's Christmas." "Good morning, sweetheart, Merry Christmas." "Grandpa, are you going to stay with us all day today?" "If you'd like, I'll stay." "We want you." "Too," Ethan and Sophia said in unison, though Sophia was still only saying single words. Richard spent that Christmas exactly where he wanted to be, surrounded by children who loved him, helping create happy memories they would carry for the rest of their lives. It wasn't the life he had planned when he was young. It was infinitely better. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have anything to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you think Richard made the right choices by giving up the company to care for Ethan? We'd love to read your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.